So, as I said, this is a series that I call But on Sunday. And this is a series of sermons that I do every week. I like to share some thoughts with my followers about ways that I see things happening in the world today and in our politics in a similar way that I see them happening in the time of Jesus. As a reminder, I'm going to talk about Jesus because that is my faith tradition, but that might not be your faith tradition, and that's completely fine. I want you to know that you are welcome to stick around and engage, and you are also fine to dip out if hearing about things that we know from the Bible and Jesus aren't your jam. I honor your faith tradition and all other faith traditions regardless. There is absolutely no problem one way or another, whether you stick around or not. So today is Pentecost Sunday. And what that means in the church is that there is an arrival of what the Bible will refer to as the Holy Spirit to folks who have been really sad and frustrated since Jesus' death. And so when the Spirit kind of arrives on that first Pentecost morning, the thing I think it's most notable to note is that it doesn't come to the powerful people. It doesn't come to the kings. It doesn't come to the leaders. It doesn't come into the temple. The disciples were actually gathered in an upper room, and they were not considered the movers and the shakers in Jerusalem. They were Galileans, which in first century Judea carried a certain amount of condescension. They were rural people, they were working people, they were fishermen with calloused hands, and they were tax collectors who had burned more bridges than they could count. Sometimes they were also even women whose testimony or thoughts about faith were not even considered valid in a court of law or in a court of public opinion. But these are the people that the Holy Spirit decided to choose to fill first. And I say all that because Pentecost isn't a story about the establishment. It's a story about who God keeps choosing. And so the crowd that's gathered in the streets hear this commotion and they come to see what's happening, and their first reaction, bless their hearts, is to assume that these folks are drunk. They must be because they're Galileans. What could they possibly have to say or know about this? And Peter, who we know is not unshy about speaking his mind, stands up. And Peter, who just weeks before had warmed himself by a fire and denied that he even knew Jesus 3 times, that Peter stood up and said, "Let me tell you what's happening here." And he quotes the prophet Joel. And Joel's words are worth sitting with, I think, because they are scandalous in the best possible way. Peter says, "In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on the people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see vision, and your old men will dream dreams. And even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days." Even on my servants. In Joel's words, servants were at the bottom of the social order. They were the last people that anyone expected to carry a word from God. Quite frankly, they were the last people that folks expected Jesus to be hanging out with when he was alive. And yet Joel and then Peter, Joel on the very birthday of the church, plants his flag right there. The Spirit moves precisely towards those who push the margins. And I think about that word servants often, because in our own time, we might say that these folks aren't servants, but they're doing the work that is often unseen, that they're the ones that are behind the scenes. They're the home health care workers who are tending to elderly folks with a gentleness that's required, but isn't often acknowledged. They're farmers that are working in the heat. They're factory workers or employees in a warehouse that are getting packages ready overnight so that they can be ready in the morning. They're single moms who are navigating systems that weren't built with them in mind. And these are the ones that Joel saw. These are the ones that the Spirit has always been running towards, quite frankly. You know, as most of you know, I'm running for Congress in Tennessee's 3rd District, and I've sat across the table a lot with people who feel deeply just bone tired. They are frustrated. They don't feel like anyone in power is listening to them. They have struggles with their healthcare costs, and they are barely figuring out how to make their month's wages stretch. Their grief is not acknowledged when mills close or plants relocate or a town loses its reason for being because the industry that was there isn't there anymore. And not to their exhaustion, but they're being told that their concerns are niche and divisive and simply not at the right moment. But the church at Pentecost was founded as a rebuke to that kind of dismissal. Because what happened after the Spirit fell is just as important as the falling itself. In Acts chapter 2, we are told that the community begins sharing their resources. They begin pooling things together and sharing their meals and sharing their lives and sharing their money. And these people who had nothing found themselves with enough. Not because the government programmed a system by which they could have it, and not in spite of their faith, but quite frankly, because of it. And the Spirit didn't just give them tongues with which to speak. It gave them eyes to see each other and ears to actually hear the plight of one another. And that's the Pentecost that is still challenging us today, quite frankly. Not just to be moved emotionally by a story, but to ask who in our community is waiting to be heard. Who has a prophetic word to speak that we haven't made room for? Which voices have we, perhaps without even realizing it, treated like the Galileans were treated, with a quiet assumption that they don't have much to say or they're too drunk to know what they're talking about? In our faith, we have often asked these kinds of hard questions, and I'm grateful for that. We've been a faith that has asked these questions and asked people to take these questions seriously. I mean, I am asking folks to take these questions seriously every day that I'm out in the community talking with people, because I believe that the gospel has a social weight. And that loving our neighbor isn't a metaphor. It's a policy. It's a budget. It's a decision about who needs to be centered and who gets deferred, about who has a seat at the table, and about, quite frankly, who is asked to leave the table because they have been sitting there long enough. And so for me, Pentecost Sunday is our annual reminder that the Spirit did not come to bless those who were comfortable, but came to bring a kind of fire, a kind of wind, a kind of engagement that didn't seek permission. Hi, Eddie. It didn't ask permission to do this. It just did it because it landed first and always and almost stubbornly on the ones who the world counted out. And I think that as we go about our week, I want us to figure out if we have the courage to do the same. can we stubbornly and with radical engagement center the ones who aren't getting paid attention to? If we're really honest with ourselves, that's what we're called to do. And so I hope that as you go about your week and as you engage in this work, that that's something that you think about. Thanks, friends, and happy Pentecost.